shirt over here. You know, he just popped out of his always flying ahead. One thing I noticed that was very striking that I think is a hallmark of this kind of concussions and difficulties that I had, which of course is a subset of the difficulties that all brain injury patients will have. But in any case, in my case, and I believe this is relatively common, I would score very high on these short cognitive tests the first time. I'll give you 3 things to remember. Can you count back by 7s while you're, standing on 1 foot or whatever? But the neurologist, even at my urging, would never repeat the test. But had they done so, I would score near the bottom the second time around. And of course, at the end of even just these simple tests of counting backward by 7, I had head pain, nausea, I was disoriented, I couldn't stand up, and this would happen within even just 5 minutes. I had lots of audio processing difficulties. I couldn't turn speech into meaning because, of course, for most of us, I think 97% is some, I think isn't that the number, that we're visual thinkers, and when we hear an audio stream, we turn it into the symbols of thinking, the visual symbols of thinking. And I couldn't keep up. So that was quite a difficulty. And being, as a professor, it's my job to hear lectures and job talks. I had to be very tricky about sitting near the door because it's not convenient when someone is, a big moment in their life coming to give a job talk and, you run out holding your ears. Doesn't look too good. And if I stayed too long, of course, I couldn't walk anymore. So that was tricky as a professor. And I had extreme phonosensitivity. There's some sort of interesting episodes. I don't know if you remember the Ray's breaks there, or Ramon's breaks. There were some interesting episodes with these sounds that would leave me in fetal position holding my ears. And that was persistent. It got worse, of course, under brain stress. I had a complete inability to plan. I'm sure you've seen this. Time, calendars, sequences, they had no inherent meaning to me at all. When someone would say, I'll meet you at 4:30 on Tuesday, that was a scary thing for me. I'm trying to figure some way to write it down before I lose the ability to listen to what they're saying, because there was no inherent meaning of the sun traveling around the earth, and one day is like the next. And I think part of that was because I retained the cardinality property of numbers, the set of things, but I lost much about their ordinality. And without ordering, you can't get sequence, and without sequence, of course, planning is almost impossible. Pattern matching, this was a nightmare sometimes. The visual pattern matching from, for example, going to stores, trying to shop at Home Depot, or even buy food would just leave me completely debilitated, where I couldn't walk, and I'm clutching the cart, trying to get out of the store, and I would lose that almost complete loss of visual context. And we saw even some of that in the slides earlier today, where you just get the vision. All you can see is just that executive center function in there with no meaning attached to it at all. This leads, of course, to just complete and overwhelming chaos, not just in your life, but internally in your thinking as well. I lost my sensory filters, so this was not a good thing. I couldn't stop incoming sounds and visual patterns, and nor could I stop attempting to process them. So it's this strange, weird life where you can't process them in real time, and you just want it to stop, but you can't. And in fact, my very, very highly talkative and bright 3-year-old, I was a single parent at the time, is the one that almost put me over the edge at the end, because of course she never stopped talking. I couldn't turn it off. You have to shrug your shoulders sometimes. I mean, the whole deal is kind of funny. An AI professor that studies the brain getting a brain injury, I mean, that's kind of cool, right? I was at least entertained along the way. So, some funny things would come, like I would put myself in rule-following mode because I couldn't make those decisions. So I found that there was a real shift in cognition, go into the following of rules mode. And then I could go out to, eat, because then I don't have to decide what to eat or where to park or who to, that was all handled. I just followed the rules set for me. And then there was these humorous episodes would result, for example, where I'm walking down the street on Devon Avenue with my hungry friend, and I stop. And he says, "What are you doing? Let's go." And I say, "Well, I can't." What? Because there's a sign. I'm in rule following mode. What does it say? And come in. The best I could do was not go in this store, but I couldn't walk down the sidewalk.
Oh, wow.
So, of course, then, I'm laughing about this is pretty funny, and my friend is hungry and impatient, but then, finally he started laughing as well. What about running the Chicago Marathon? I like to think that running a marathon, is a bit of work. But the funny part for me was that, I would have to go in rule-following mode to avoid the visual chaos of 40,000 people running and 2 or 3 million people, colorful people waving flags and sounds along the way. So you'd think, well, the running would be a hard part. Running was a piece of cake. Rule-following mode, downtown Chicago, what do you think the difficulty was? Running along, stoplights, red. It was all I could do to get through those intersections. So I thought these were pretty funny. Sometimes, we could be entertained along the way. There was a downside. And in my case, I just have a sort of naturally resilient personality. And I have a lot of really great people around me, including those 5 delightful children. So this wasn't so much of a problem for me. I could be, philosophical about it. But in the other concussives I ran into, I think this was a real problem, and I think it may contribute to the high rate of suicide. I don't know, but I think it's a question we might ask. And that's this private joke that we would all share. Welcome to life as an alien. Welcome to life as in exile from the human race. I had a woman, she was about 70 years old, one of the early computer scientists. She had a broken bone that wasn't healing, and she had diabetes, and she had cancer. But she'd also slipped and got a concussion from slipping on the ice. And she would joke with me, said, cancer, no problem, diabetes, I can deal with that. Man, but this brain injury is a tough one. It's intense, it's pervasive, and it's permanent. You're just not there anymore. The you that was there, that you've known your whole life, is just gone. And it's in those strange little ways. If I say, do you see that big blue box over there? That sounds normal. But then what happens when you find yourself saying, oh, do you see that blue big box over there? Well, syntactically, it's still correct, but it sounds odd. And there's these 1,000 little rules we have to get through life in our social interchanges, and they're gone. And you don't feel like yourself anymore. Anyway, it was true that I did often long to be human just one more time, to return what I thought of as home back to my body and myself. But I had the realization that it would never happen again. I remember that moment sitting in my living room one day thinking, I remember my father who died. He knew his death was coming. He was very graceful about it. And I thought, that's happened to me too. I will never get any of that back again. And anything I have from here on out, I should treat as serendipity. And I think that's common. A lot of concussions sufferers will feel that after a few years, especially when they're told, what? You'll never get better, right? That's it. I had too many symptoms to list. I'm going to close this just saying, the usual list that you will have seen, all kinds of sleep disturbance, hemispatial neglect, profound loss of compass orientation for me on the face of the earth, which affected my symbol creation. And I couldn't, the number 7 didn't mean 7 anymore because it no longer stretched to the east. I didn't know where east was. I could write, sort of, but I couldn't read in the early days. I used words in strange ways. They sounded the same, but they were the wrong word. I lost, all sense of dialogue with God and so on. But you won't have heard those. Now the good part. In January of 2008, I went to see Donald Lee Marcus. I got lucky. Someone ran into her, a patient of hers at a party. And then within a few days, she sent me to Debbie Zielinski. Debbie, if you can put your hand there, thank you. And there was an interesting moment, after these 8 years of seeing so many people that, they tried their best, but they had nothing to offer. And forgive me if I paraphrase it incorrectly, Debbie, but she, had this pile of notes, and I said, at one moment after going through an hour and a half of testing, I said, well, I'd like to talk over my notes so you're clear on what it is that I'm dealing with. And she said, I don't need to talk them over with you. She's polite, she had other patients there. And I thought, well, gee, I was kind of hoping we would. But she said, well, I read them anyway, first of all, and she always reads everything while I was under the test. And then she said, and I already know what's wrong with you. I thought, what? What? And then she kind of turned back, she had other things to do, and she said, and I know how to fix it. And of course, she was right, yes, and saying that, I want to celebrate those moments in your office because you do know how to fix it, yes? And how many times have you heard from patients coming in saying, I've been through testing and doctors for 5 years, or yes? Seeing a lot of nods here. All right, well, anyway, I started with these context-free visual puzzles to rebuild cognitive pathways, and this is Donnelly Marcus, who was a PhD and a cognitive restructuring specialist. I work with the prescription eyeglasses to emphasize healthy pathways. We had heard about that in an earlier talk, trying to find an area that works well and start there, and that's my understanding of what we did. So we tried to avoid the damaged areas. And get me back started on the right track. So here are some of the context-free visual puzzles. I started out with 3 dots building a triangle. And then after a week of triangles and squares, I've stepped up to maybe once in a while overlaying a triangle on top of a square. That's where I started. And then after several months with the therapy, I would get these puzzles where on the upper left here, we have the original puzzle, and then down in the lower right is what I would have to construct from the dot. So I had to do 3D visualization. There were a lot of different puzzles that we went through. In my own case, I deviated a little from Donnelly's protocol, is that I would do these in my head. I thought that, if I'm going to get back to being a professor, I need that spatial thinking for solving these AI problems that I was looking forward to working on again. So I would do these entirely in my head for a week, and then at the end, to get the motor skills, I would write them down. We had these equation puzzles, the set of lines on the left, plus the set of lines almost on the right, and then I would have to fill in the blank from A, B, C, D, or E on the bottom to produce the figure over on the right. That would be another puzzle I worked on. So anyway, I worked for 6 months with these puzzles. I was very diligent. I worked almost every day on them. I met with Dr. Marcus every 2 weeks. I performed visualizations of the dots, as I mentioned, in my head over and over again. I developed motor skills in 2 ways. One is that I would first see all the shapes rising out of the page, and then I would imagine myself drawing those. So I learned the motor skills without actually using my hands, and then in the end I would actually draw them. Donnelly, there was kind of a funny moment when she said, remember how I'm all curly cued up here in the first day? She said, Elliott, need I remind you that you have a motor skill problem here? Anyway, so I thought that in my own case, these 3D projection puzzles helped restore the reasoning capabilities I needed for my work as a professor. And then I underwent neuro-optometric testing. I was normal on the Padula visual midline shift, although I think my symptoms were very consistent with the midline shift, though perhaps for other reasons. I was normal on King Devic, I was normal on the Ledger stereo test too. I had significant lateral distress on one orientation of the yoked prison walk, which I think is pretty funny to, one way I'm fine, up and down, and tip back a little bit, and then the last one, can't walk down the hall. You've seen this, yes, in your practice. It's pretty funny as me as a professor to observe this. I thought that was about, why am I running into the wall here? Anyway, I had an ATNR that was present. And I had a habitual upward bias on the superfixation disparity test, though it was just within normal range. But I was significantly perturbed outward in the distance and inward close by on Van Grape, causing an exhausting lag in cognition that I'm sure you've seen sometimes. On the visual localization test, with the pencil in front, I was completely unable to find the previously viewed tip of the pencil with my eyes closed in any position with either arm. The where I am coordination was very perturbed. On the Z-bell test, with my eyes closed, I was significantly unable to find the bells in any quadrant with either hand. So I've observed this Z-bell test, for those of you that might not be familiar with it, maybe 50 times. And it's almost magical, the feedback that is immediately present from these non-image forming retinal pathways. So, ringing the bell, I was missing it by quite a distance in all quadrants, high bell, low bell, high quadrant.